Okay. Well, let's start, I guess, in three, two, one. Assalamualaikum again, everyone, and to another video of Ramadan reflections. So, yeah, baru je tadi balik solat apa semua. Jadi sekarang ni tengah nak buat video ni. Bear in mind, I'm probably going to upload these videos slightly later on. Jadi faham-faham je lah macam mana ya. So for today's video, I actually wanted to talk about my experience growing up, and to a sense, the topic for today as well is actually called realizing that Islam is not restricting, or realizing that Islam is not a restriction. So, as many of you guys who grew up in your respective countries, a lot of the times you look to the West for your ideas and for even inspiration. You kind of glorify the West. And especially during that time after 9/11, when Islam was basically being demonized by the West, and to a sense, it kind of discouraged a lot of youth to actually, especially for the American Muslims especially, it basically just deters you from actually practicing your religion. And a lot of accounts of like American Muslims who grew up there, who saw struggles growing up being Muslim, unless they're in a highly Muslim populated area. And even during those times, and even in those locations, they still have problems with their religion. They still have problems practicing their religion. So how does this relate to us in, like, for me, Malaysia? So the best way I could say it is, when I was that age, when I was going through, growing up, being able to follow my parents, ada rezeki untuk pergi keluar negara, bukannya duduk sana pun, like basically just visiting different countries, and basically understanding that in different countries, not everything is like Malaysia, so I had to learn that the hard way, especially when I was a child. It really made me understand that the principles that I lived and the principles that I basically practiced when I was growing up in Malaysia is not the same as not the same as how people are in other countries. It becomes to a sense that you understand that when you're growing up and when you're looking at the West especially, and a lot of my friends, we grew up watching American media, watching YouTube, Cartoon Network, Disney, Nickelodeon. We grew up watching American media, therefore we kind of look at that as a point of reference. However, that also comes with another twist to it, in where the ideas of the West, and to an extent, a lot of the values of the West kind of continue on and actually follow up and go into the minds of other people who are not from the West. So I grew up watching Nickelodeon, watching media, watching YouTube, a lot of YouTube actually. So I saw that when it came to growing up, I never really had anyone who looked like me. I never really had people who looked like me, act like me, other than the people around me. And to an extent, even in Malaysia, the movies and the TV, like, they only show one side of who you are. I mean, now there's more of it, but they never really truly go into like, oh, this is a voice for my people, this is that. We didn't really have that. We had a Malaysian identity. We never really had a Malay identity. So I know it sounds weird when I say it, but to a sense, I grew up watching media, to a sense, for me to find different aspects of who I want to be in other things: music, YouTube, cartoons, animations, whatever. It comes to a point where I kind of wanted to live like them, because you often want to replicate the people that you admire, right? A lot of people are now admiring Andrew Tate. They want to live like Andrew Tate. Some people admire certain people, and they just basically want to live like how the people that they watch and the people that they praise live, which is not wrong, but it also comes with a bad side to it, which is when you never really have a point of reference, and especially during those times growing up with it, you kind of pick and choose, or you kind of take what is ever nearest. And a lot of those people never really grew up Muslim, never really grew up in any place that is near Muslims, and they never really have a point of reference, to a sense that you're taking from them, but they're never really knowing how you are, which is fun, which is just a part of media, which is a part of how you watch these people. I don't know who you are, I don't know how you live, and to an extent I can only speak for myself. So it's not fair for me to say that you're a certain way, or this person is a certain way, or how I think that I should be able to live the way that this person should be. With how the West has always been colored, it's never really far away from a lot of this ideas of, liberalism, or even to an extent, a lot of like more extremist ideas of how men should be or how people should be. Especially growing up in that kind of like, the way that you live growing up with that and that in mind, kind of see it as, wait, they don't live like how I live, so I want to live like how they live. And I will have to say that's kind of like the worst way you could be, in where you don't really have an idea of where you want to go. And how Islam ties into it is because how Islam is for me is a part of my life, is a part of who I am, is a part of my family unit, how we grew up. So to an extent, we kind of grew up watching these videos, but they never really have any type of ideas for us. They never really exemplified for us. I can remember the one time where I saw an example of what I wanted to be and how I could replicate that with someone who looks like me is when I was 18, watching some guy on YouTube. And it kind of just spoke to me saying, wait, I can be my authentic self. I can be a religious Muslim. I can be someone who lives the life that really gives himself to the religion. And to a sense, it's not really a bad thing when you really understand that when you're growing up as a Muslim, you kind of realize that, especially with time and age, you kind of realize that Islam is not really a restricting thing for your life. A lot of people, they live through peer pressure. Going to university especially was an eye-opener for me. When I see my friends and, some people that I met who, before they even entered university, they never really even drank, they never went to clubs, they never really did anything beyond that. However, after entering university, even in a Muslim country, they saw the outside world, or what we would call it as freedom, and they chase after it, they lust over it. I don't think that's a very healthy way to live, to be honest. And to an extent, I don't think that that's the way that I want to live, because even in those situations where I never really, that was pretty much foreign to me. I've never been to a club. I've never really went drinking. I never drank before in my life. So in those moments, in those circumstances, I kind of see myself realizing that a lot of people look at Islam as something of a restricting thing because of how they define what fun is. Especially how they grew up with the same things that I did. They wanted the Western life, and how the West is so exemplified for the greatness, and it kind of shows that they don't really have a good sense of self. Later on in my life, as I am growing up and as I'm growing older, I kind of see that Islam really isn't a restricting way for me to live. It's kind of like the ideal way for me to live. And as my friends, or as some people that I've met before as well, who did lust over the West, they're slowly coming back to it. They're slowly coming back to Islam, and they're slowly being more and more pious because they see the failure of living how the West lives. It's not really the most healthy way to live, to be honest. And it's not really the way that anyone should live, especially when you grew up not in that, culture. especially knowing us as Malaysians, me being a Muslim Malay man in Malaysia, it kind of spoke to me knowing that, okay, the peer pressures of the world are going to be that way, but it's my choice whether I follow it or not. Even in Islam, there's also this understanding that being a Muslim or even walking the path of a Muslim is walking through a road of thorns, or walking through, like, it's basically hardship. Being a good Muslim means going through hardship, and it also takes sacrifice because of how the world is. You could have easily been in a place where you never really grew up Muslim and still find Islam, and that's one of like the divine interventions of God, in where he kind of made a way for you. And the funny thing is, when you see a lot of these guys, especially people from the West coming to the East, they kind of see that the West is kind of messing up. It's not an ideal way to live, and to an extent is not really the most best way to live. Like, I wouldn't be able to say anything because I'm not from the West. I'm not from a Western country. I'm from the East. I'm from Malaysia. So I don't really have a way for me to really talk about it. The best way I could say is, when you're living your life in accordance to what you're doing, living as a Muslim and realizing that Islam is not a restricting thing is almost a blessing. When you see yourself walking down this path, when you're walking down, the path of how life is, with different challenges, different moments where you don't really know where you're gonna go, it kind of makes you think that being Muslim, or to an extent being a religious man or being a spiritual person, kind of brings you back to your original road. Even in the Quran, it reminds us that Allah will never burden the soul more than it can bear. And another surah or another ayat from the Quran, which really helped me out a lot, which is, and he found you lost and guided you. For me, it just shows Allah's mercy. So to a sense, is the ideal way of living, because when you're living your life in accordance to how the Creator wants it to be, whether you do whatever you want, you do whatever you want. You are given free will. That's what free will is. That's what God gave us. When you live that way, when you live in that accordance, you kind of see a different light to it all, especially. So me at this age, I kind of realized that Islam is not a restriction for me. It's not a restriction for me to have fun, because I don't associate fun with how certain Western ideals or certain way that some people see fun as. I don't see getting wasted, getting high, or messing around with girls to an extreme extent fun. All those things that are considered extreme extents, I don't see it as fun. I see it more as of a fucking burden. To be honest, I cuss a lot, yeah, but I realize this is just part of my vocabulary, and sorry to say, but you're kind of fucking your life over when you're doing all those things. A lot of problems come from fornication, from taking drugs, from drinking, or whatever. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it, you shouldn't do it, or you shouldn't be practicing those things. All I can say is follow what the Quran says. Follow what the Quran says. I'm not trying to teach you guys anything. I'm just trying to tell you guys that when you live your life in accordance to the Quran and the Sunnah and how Allah has accorded us to live, you kind of realize that Islam really isn't a restriction. It's kind of a blessing. And when you realize that Islam is a blessing to your life, you kind of tighten up and become a better person, or at the very least a more reasonable person. And on that note, I gotta go. Assalamualaikum, take care, stay safe, and be well.